Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The Trump and Biden presidential poll was the worst miss in 40 years. 40 years. So that must have been pretty bad, right? Well, we're going to look at that and why. Why was it off, right? Because, it's off, okay, that's not great, but what's causing this problem? It was off in 2016, it got worse, worst in 40 years in 2020. What's going on? And also, Ohio politics is changing rapidly. For those of you that don't know, that's the home state of The State of Us. And if you don't live in Ohio, you still should care, because the examples and what we're going to talk about are big indicators not only for Ohio and the Midwest, but also for the country and what's happening all around the nation, how we're moving further apart and why, and not just in the conventional ways that you might think. But any conversation on our national divide, President Trump and President Biden's and the 2020 election could certainly not be complete without
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Be careful about how long that 40 years is, okay? Because that was the first presidential election that yours truly voted in.
Oh,
so it wasn't that long ago.
Showing your age.
Yeah. But I'm just saying it's all
senior
relative.
Senior historian.
Right. It's all relative when you talk about 40 years. Oh my gosh, that's such a long time ago. Now, whoa. Be careful. Wasn't that long.
Well, see, folks, if you're wondering how old your friendly redneck liberal is, if that was the first election he voted in, you can do some basic computation there, right?
Well, it depends on what public school system you went to, whether you have the ability
and come
to
up
do
with something that ought to be at least in the ballpark.
That's right.
So what's our word of the day?
Close. Well, the word of the day is astute. It's a little shorter, just 2 syllables. A-S-T-U-T-E, normally used as an adjective, means having or showing a clever or shrewd mind, cunning, crafty, wily. It's interesting because, President Trump made he made his living saying, well, you can't believe the polls. Get out there and vote. You can't go out there and vote. And then we find the election. It's like, oh, well, yeah, you can't trust the polls, at least this last one and the one in 2016. And if you're a pollster, you're obviously concerned, because then, well, how do you get people to believe you? But as a voter, it's like, okay, so what am I supposed to do? But anyway, let's get into it and talk about what the polls are going to try to do to straighten things up, and then look at Ohio and how where you live and your education and your financial situation seems to be determining how you vote and how it's changing different sections of the state.
There's a good bit to talk about, and there's, as there is with things that we cover on The State of Us, there's some nuance. So you're going to need to be astute if you're going to pick up on everything that we're talking about and draw the conclusions. And as you're listening, we want you to share with us what you're thinking. How do you do that? Well, you send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. Lance and I read all of those that come in, and we like to see what you're saying, so please do send it, podcast@thestateofus.org. So, Lance, we've got Wall Street Journal articles today. And the one on the polling miss, it says the following. In the aggregate, the panel, and this is the panel of pollsters at their industry convention, said that the polls in 2020 overstated support for Democratic nominee Joe Biden by 3.9 percentage points in the national popular vote in the final 2 weeks of the campaign, almost 4%. That was a larger error than the 1.3 point overstatement in 2016 surveys for Hillary Clinton, who won the popular vote but lost in the Electoral College. It was the most substantial error in polling since 1980, when surveys found it hard to measure the size of Ronald Reagan's impending landslide and overstated support for President Jimmy Carter by 6 percentage points. So polls have understated Donald Trump's support now, Lance, for 2 elections in a row. But in some years, they've overstated Republican support as well, as was the case in 2012 when President Barack Obama beat Mitt Romney. One question that has so far eluded the group is a firm sense of why the polls were off and how to correct the problem. So there are some ideas about why the polls are off. And the most notable one is this concept that the article lays it out here. Alternatively, Republicans who were willing to talk to pollsters might have been those most open to supporting Mr. Biden, while Republicans who declined to be polled may have been more supportive of Mr. Trump. If the latter possibility were the case, then merely increasing the number of Republicans in a survey would not solve the problem. On the whole, Republicans are less willing to answer surveys now than Democrats. And the ones that do appear to be more open to supporting somebody of another party. In other words, they're more moderate.
Very astute observation there, Justin. My first 2 points, though, are one, who cares if they're off on the national numbers? Because, we don't use that to elect our leader. So who cares what the popular vote is? It doesn't determine the winner. So why talk about it? Then the second point is, I think it's interesting that people dive into this when they're bombarded by it. But really, it doesn't matter because it's used by both sides to either point out, look, see how far we're ahead, you should give us more money. Or look, see how far behind we are? We need more money and more of your time to get out. And that's time that's wasted instead of saying, well, what are you going to do if you get elected? That's what I want to hear. You always want to ask me about more money because of the polls. I want to hear what you're going to do. Tell me what you're going to do. And then ask your polling questions based on that information. But it is interesting that when you talk about it, is as they go through the article, is it the Trump aura here that causes this problem? Or they've had this problem in the past, in 2012 when they overstated Romney's support against President Obama. And, even goes back into 1952 when they didn't realize that Eisenhower was going to win as much. So do we need to have a conversation about why do we spend so much money on these polls and pay so much attention to them? Is that where our conversation goes? Or is it, well, why are they having so much problems? And again, the reason they're having problems, that's kind of an interesting look at it. Do they have too much influence? I guess would be my question back to you, Justin, unless you've got another point to make. It seems to me like if the polls are having this much problem, are we letting them have too much airspace and are they causing more problems than they're worth? That people are pointing to the polls instead of, okay, let's accept who the winner is, who the losers are, and then let's move on. Because they did get the Georgia runoff seats right. The article points out that they did get those. They were spot on. And those were two very close elections. So the counter argument to myself is that there are some valid polls out there that do a good job. But the other part is, does it really matter? Because we're all going to go vote anyway, or not.
Right. Or
do we not go vote because the poll says it's not a close election?
Did polls, right. Did polls make people go vote?
Right. Or made people not vote. Mm-hmm. Like my vote's not going to matter because it's already over.
Well, how many people didn't vote in we've talked about that before. How many people did or didn't vote in 2016 or did or didn't vote in 2020 as a result of what the polls were telling them?
Right.
I think the polls were more ignored in 2020 than they usually are, in part because of what happened in 2016. They're like, wow, yeah, you can't, whatever that says, don't pay attention to that. Because even if you're on the side of believing, that polls have some kind of value, you've probably been provided some skepticism as a result of everything that happened, obviously, in 2016. So, and then subsequently now in 2020 as well. Now, I guess the thing that I wrote down, I was making me think about the book that we're reading right now, Lance, because we have one coming up for folks that I think is gonna talk just about the history of our elections and how they always been so brutal, and the answer is yes and no, right? We went through an age where they were not. But before that, they absolutely were. And in some ways, they were worse than what we have right now. Mm-hmm. And every time we get to an election year, there's discussion about the pageantry of American elections, right? And I wrote down the word because I was like, I don't know if that's really an accurate term for what we have. It's more of a circus. than it is a pageant. I think that's a bit too civil. Brings to mind a bit too formal and proper type ceremony. It's more of an entertainment bonanza than it is anything else, and that's why we have the polls, right? Because in one way or another, they feed that. And well, yeah, we don't want to talk about the issues. We want to talk about who's winning and losing, and that's like, we talk about all these sports fans, in the United States, and are they really sports fans or are they just competition fans? And it's an easy form of competition, right? But how do we continue to make our politics, or rather, how did sports become like the politics of the late 1800s, But that's how it's been in this country. I mean, it's a sport, right? And we care more about what team are we on and what colors do we fly and what parades can we have and how can we get mad at the other side and what we need to do to beat them. And in many ways, the poll is the score, right? I mean, that's all we get until the election is over. That's just the fat lady singing at the end of the day, and it's like everything up until then, the polls are telling us how we're doing, is our team winning or not? That's what we want to know. So
was it a fourth quarter comeback or
right?
Late inning heroics or whatever? Okay.
Because we can talk about it after it's over, but there's nothing quite like watching it in real time. So I guess that's the circus, the polls lend themselves to the circus. As far as a meaningful impact, we'd probably be better off without them. Almost assuredly, from a voter standpoint, we would be better off without polls, because even if you're like Lance and I and you don't want them to impact you, the mere fact that they exist has an impact.
So true.
I mean, you're right. We're wasting 15 minutes here talking about this because so we don't like the polls, but here we are.
But the impact is huge. The impact is so huge.
Exactly,
and that's our frustration.
Yes, is
that we shouldn't let the polls play this big of a role, but they do. So therefore, that's why we need to talk about it.
So Ohio politics is changing rapidly beneath a stable surface, according to the Wall Street Journal. 2 counties are moving in opposite partisan directions ahead of Senate and gubernatorial races in 2022. Exciting or scary, depending on how you look at it. We're going to dive into what's going on, though. What's happening in Ohio, and what does it say about the Midwest? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
On the surface, Ohio looks like an island of calm after the turbulent 2020 election. Donald Trump won this state by 8.07 points in 2016 and won it again by 8.02 points in 2022. So a small decrease, but I mean, really, pretty marginal. However, underneath those stable results, the state saw significant swings at the county level that suggest forces are at work remaking the electorate of Ohio. The 2 counties that this article chooses to focus on are Delaware County, which is north of Columbus. That's the state capital for people that don't know. It moved away from Trump by 9 percentage points. And then the other one is Pike County, which is about 90 minutes to the south of that, and it moved toward Trump by 12 points. So you got one moving away, one moving toward. And the reason, by the way, folks, they chose these 2 counties is they were the biggest movers in the whole state.
Pike County located on Route 23 with the infamous saying, reading, writing, and Route 23. That's what I learned.
Oh, yeah?
Many people, yes. My wife's family is from that region, and they would travel up U.S. Route 23 to work in Columbus. And they would come in Sunday night and leave Friday night and go home to their families. But Columbus had the jobs. And so this is a relatively poor, white, rural area in Ohio. And interestingly, it moved towards Donald Trump even more in 2020 than it did in 2016.
So Delaware County is the one that's moved away from Trump, and Pike is moving towards it. So keep this in your noggins here, right, as we talk about
Delaware's
this.
population is growing, and Pike County's population is getting smaller.
Correct. So more than half of the adult population in Delaware has a college degree. But in Pike, the figure is about 13%. Delaware's median household income is well over double that of Pike, and the population in both counties is mostly white, though Pike's is more so. And in the past few elections, the two have changed places. Delaware, this is the one that moved away from Trump, folks, okay? Remember? It was once solidly GOP. It voted for Mr. Trump by less than 7 percentage points. And Pike, once a hotly contested battleground that Republican Mitt Romney won by just a single vote, not a single percent, folks, one vote in 2012, that's how close it was, gave Mr. Trump a 49-point margin of victory. So in 2012, right, eight years from this past election, one vote was the deciding factor between Obama and Romney. And in 2020, a 49-point spread, not 49 votes, 49-point spread, right? So a little bit of a shift.
Yeah, basically 75%. 3 out of every 4 voters in Pike County voted for President Trump.
Versus a virtual tie, right? So
in 8 years.
Yeah, in 8 years. Yeah, it's not like, this has been several decades. It's in 8 years.
That's amazing.
In 8 years. 2 presidents, right?
Right.
I mean, that's it. Not even 2 full 8-year presidential terms. You have 4 years of Obama, 4 years of Trump, and it changed.
Right.
The 2 counties, according to the article, illustrate a broad trend in American politics, particularly in the industrial Midwest. Since the turn of the century, poll data shows that suburban and college-educated voters have trended Democratic, while rural voters without degrees have drifted toward the GOP. Mr. Trump seems to have speeded that shift. What happens with the vote in Pike and Delaware in Ohio's 2022 gubernatorial and Senate races might shed light on Mr. Trump's long-term impact on American politics. Recent shifts in Ohio have extended far beyond Delaware and Pike, though. Nearly half of the counties in Ohio shifted 4 percentage points or more toward or away from Donald Trump in 2020, compared with 2016. So 4 years, folks, 4 years. And there are some clear patterns in that data. The 7 counties in the state that shifted more than 4 percentage points away from Mr. Trump were above the state's average for college degrees, and most were far above it. The 34 counties that shifted toward Mr. Trump by more than 4 points were below the state's average for bachelor's degrees. Most were far below it. But in Pike and Delaware, the 2 biggest movers in the state, area officials sense the size of the change that might make them more durable. The day will come, and I think it will be fairly soon, when you will see a Democrat representing Delaware County, Mr. Gerbert said, adding that the thought was inconceivable a decade ago.
Well, we referred to my age earlier in the show.
Very old.
And this is the big...
Ancient.
This is the big change that I've seen. I grew up in rural areas in a Midwestern state, southern Missouri, and I never...
In a poor community.
I never met a Republican. There wasn't a Republican that ran. It was all Democrats. Which Democrat are you going to support? And now my home, which hasn't been my home since I was 12, but it's still considered home because that's where I spent much of my formative time. They're Republican. And it's like, I'm just amazed because growing up, my grandfathers, talk about partisan, they wouldn't have voted Republican if it were the only people on the ticket, and they voted every election. Voting was stressed in my household, and neither one of them were wealthy. And they were both religious and both very community active in their communities. strong, true Democrat Party line straight down, I know they've, flipped in their graves a few times. I've voted for a Republican for an office, local, state, or national. And yet those people today and the people we live around here in our fair part of the state of Ohio are Republican, and they're people that growing up would have never been Republican because they're not very well off. They're working class. And that was the Democratic base when I was growing up. And that just blows my mind that we've seen almost 180-degree change with that. And you pointed out something to me when we were talking about this earlier, Justin, that made me stop and think. And what was that? What was your comment when I said, why did all in 40 years, 50 years, why have we seen all these working class people switch from being supporters of the Democratic Party, hard-line partisan supporters of the Democratic Party, to now hard-line supporters of the Republican Party? And your answer was?
The issue is people like to support things that speak to them, right? And lately, anyway, the Democrats don't seem to be, and again, this is all a matter of perspective, so, take it for what you will. They don't seem to be speaking to quote unquote me. And what do I mean by me? Because I'm not talking about me, Justin. Well, you hear a lot of talk from the Democrats about wokeness, right? And they may not use the term, but that's generally what we would refer to, right? They're talking a lot about race issues, right? They're talking a lot about women. They're talking a lot about immigrants. And that may be all fine and dandy, right? I might be a white male who's working in a factory in Urbana, Ohio, which is where we broadcast from. And that might not bother me, right? I may not have an issue with doing things for those folks, but I didn't hear anything about me. Nothing that you just mentioned is me, none of it. So, and we're not even getting into if I have a problem with one of those groups, right? I'm just in the hypothetical of I don't even have an issue with it, right? I mean, if you want to do that, that's fine. I'm for helping them, not a big deal. But what are you going to do, right? Because that's what we want to know. Brass tacks. What are you going to do for me? Well, it sounds like you're not going to do jack for me, So
I can be a supporter of women's issues. I can be a supporter of better race relations. I can be a supporter of immigration. And I'm still going to slide more towards the Republican ideas because you as a Democrat didn't say what you're going to do for me as the white male, is your point.
Well, because Trump comes in, right? And his thing is, well, they don't care about you. They don't listen to you. Washington's out to get you. And it's you,
they
right?
being the Democrats.
Them, it's that whole, the Democrats.
For Trump, it was even broader.
Oh, yeah.
Because Trump was a Democrat who decided to run as a Republican, so he just attacked everybody.
Exactly.
The only person who cares about you is me, so it became a personality cult. Trump is the only thing that cares about you.
But we know, right? You and I have talked.
That's your point.
Yes,
right?
yeah. On the show, we've talked about that psychology, right? Of those powerful statements. If you attack somebody, right, or convince them that they're being attacked, it's everything else fades away, because it's a built-in emotional thing that we've been trained literally over thousands of years, right, as human beings, to immediately shut down and focus solely on the assault, right? Because that's how you survive. If you were being physically attacked, you can't be thinking about everything else in the world. You got to focus, right, and do everything you can to survive. So he uses a lot of powerful statements and communicators that even if I care about some of that other stuff, the women's issues, immigration, and that's right. If you don't care about them, then it's a whole other thing, because now the Democrats aren't even saying anything that you care about, right? Not only are they not talking about you, but they're not even talking about any issues you care about. So they're like totally, well, you just don't matter, even if they're not saying it, that's what you're feeling, right? Because well, you're doing these policies and stuff, but it sounds like you do them for all these other people. So they're not for me. And even if those policies, right, that are going to help the immigrants, are going to help the black people, are going to help the women, even if they're going to help you too, that all gets lost because you are convinced that you're under attack. And that's not, I don't mean to criticize people who are being convinced of that, because in many ways, Lance and I have talked about how rural America has been left behind. and that both parties in different ways are to blame.
I was going to say, how do we fix this and fix the problems?
And that's what we have to talk about coming up, because we want to move to that positive, right? So what do you all think about that? While we share some important information here, send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. Let us know what you think. Do you agree with that synopsis? Is that what's going on? And where do we go from here? Well, to find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
So Lance, my contention, right, is that the Democrats don't share things that speak to showing, right, that they are for white working class Americans. And on the other hand, the Republicans have said that's an opportunity, right? That's what we go for.
To me, all the Republicans have done is just bash all those other groups. What have they come through and done? And I think that's where the psychology is working. It's like, yeah, they're speaking for me because they're bashing everybody else because nobody's talking about me. But the Republicans aren't really doing anything. And so therein lies the problem. If the Democrats, if what you're saying is true, and I think there's some truth in it, but not all of it's true, that the Democrats are worried about all these other groups, and the Republicans are giving lip service to the white males, then nothing's happening. And
still nothing's being done for the working class.
Right, no matter if they're single moms, people of color, white males,
you're still getting
young
screwed.
People, old people, the working class is falling further and further behind. I mean, I was just watching something today about the number of billionaires in the United States and how they have been protected from paying income tax. And if they would pay income tax through laws, legal, and putting their stuff into offshore banks, that we could fund a lot of the things that we're talking about. We got to get back to what the issues are, and we've got to start doing things for the people. And the people being the working class people, and I don't care, religion, race, gender, doesn't matter, but most of us work for a living. And we're not doing any, they're so busy, the parties are so busy putting us off on each other that they're laughing and my point is that the political parties are laughing all the way to the bank off of our hard work. And so quit worrying about Republican and Democrat and start voting for the people that are going to do something for us. Because I think the Republicans and the Democrats both are just making sure they're lining their own pockets and they're using us to get there. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, that's where I am. I'm not saying you're wrong, but it's folks, I think we're being used. The working class is being used as a pawn in this game where the wealthy are getting wealthier and we're never going to catch them. And they keep throwing out stuff that, oh, well, I think you're going to, or, well, you don't want to support that group because, give money to us because they're not going to talk about you. We're going to talk about you and not do anything for you. And the bottom line is things are breaking down around us and nothing is being done for us.
Because if they
there's no infrastructure. We can't pass an infrastructure bill.
Because if they fix the problems, then
we'd start making money.
There's nothing to talk about.
Well, no, if they fix the problem, then the wealth inequality would go down and there'd be problems would be solved. We wouldn't dislike one another because we wouldn't point fingers at each other because, the problem can't be me. It's got to be you.
That doesn't sound good for donations to political
parties. That's my point. I don't want donors.
Because if I'm running a political party,
I don't want political parties. I want people that are going to get things done. I want politicians who are going to work for the working class and work to make the country stronger so we can continue to grow. I don't want a political party. I want somebody who's going to work to pass the laws that will help America grow.
That would be nice.
All Americans, not the few wealthy, all Americans.
Because the problem you're highlighting is that if you're running a political party, what brings in donations? fiery, raucous campaigns. And how do you get those? You get them by dividing
for
people.
Money? We're reading a book about a fiery speakers. You know, it was the Facebook or the the internet of the late 19th century. But is that what it takes? I'll start the fiery oratory for the common man. Let's go, Quit sending your money to the Republicans and the Democrats and send it to the people who are actually working to pass legislation for the masses, which is most of us, folks, whether you're white, black, male, female, whatever, wherever you fall, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, most of us are in that working group, and nobody, neither the Republicans nor the Democrats, are doing anything for us and doing anything for the country to grow or to pave the way for us to be able to grow.
It does not have to be this way.
It doesn't.
But we let it because we enjoy.
There's more of us than there are of them.
Yep.
So we get them to work for us. Okay, that's the point. If we vote, they work for us. If they don't work for us, we get rid of them. That's as it's stated. That's how it can work. But we sit back and say, oh, well, they're in charge, so we just have to do whatever they say.
We're working for them right now.
Right.
They tell us what to care about, and then when they don't do their job, we keep paying them. I'm
talking about the peaceful overthrow of the government, which is done through voting. When we just keep going through, it's like, no, we tried you for 2 years. You didn't do anything. We're going to go with somebody else who says they're going to do something for us. Nope. We went with you for 6 years in the Senate. Nope. You're out. It's like, I like you as a person, but you didn't do anything. You didn't get infrastructure. You didn't increase minimum wage. You didn't do things for the working class. You're gone. We're going to try somebody else in a peaceful overthrow of the government known as voting in an election.
Part of the problem, though, right, is that it's that belief. And folks, we're all subject to this because it happens to all of us. I mean, I'm guilty of it, right? The belief that our local elected officials, and I don't mean at the local government, I mean, like, for example, our congressman in this district, Ohio's 4th Congressional District, is Jim Jordan, right? It's the belief that old Jimmy isn't the problem, right? Because it's everybody else. I mean, he tells us he's trying. He tells us, he said, and by God, he grew up from here. So there's no way that having spent, 10 plus years in Washington, there's no way that could have corrupted him. There's no way that he could have been taken over, sold into the game.
But you look at his voting record and he doesn't vote for any of those things.
But I'm just saying as an example of anybody, right? Because that's what we all convince ourselves. It's even if I'm in California, right? And in California's 8th Congressional District, I'm convinced that they told me they're fighting for me, right?
Why do we do that? Because why don't we get beyond that and look at their voting records?
Because it's easier. It's easier to buy into the party, and it's more entertaining.
You're telling me all the time with the internet, all this information is at my fingertips.
Well, we have it right here. I mean, we got all these articles. We link everything on the State of Us. It's not like it's not out there. We're doing the work for people, and I mean, people are doing work for us, right? I mean, Wall Street Journal's out there. The New York Times they're churning out the stories, but we're not acting on them. It's not like the information's not there. It's not like it's not a secret. But it's easier to tune into Fox News. And frankly, it's more entertaining. I mean, that's just the truth, and CNN. I mean, I just walked casually into the house the other day. My grandma was sitting there. CNN comes on, and I was just thinking about I was just listening to the music, it was turn of the hour, right? And here comes the big orchestra and the breaking news banner, and we're really excited because here it comes and we don't even know what the hell it is. And it's great. It's breaking news. Who cares what it is? Because they said it's breaking. So it's got to be important, right? And that's and that's what we do with the elections too. I mean, that's that whole, the walk-ups and the intros and the hype. And then we do the whole speech and what the hell did they talk about? I don't really know, but it was a lot of fun. And Trump got that,
I'm all about doing.
We're reading about these people. And the thing I keep thinking is, Trump's got what these people had back then. He understood that it's way better to put on a show It's way easier to convince people to vote for you, to put on a show, than it is to actually talk about anything of any real substance, because that's boring to people.
See, but I was born in the show me state. I don't want to show. I want you to show me. Show me what you did. Don't tell me what you're going to do. Show me what you did. And if you're always going to tell me this is what I'm going to do. Okay, what'd you do? Well, I'm going to do this. No, what are you going to do? What did you do? I don't want to hear about what you're going to do. I want to know what you did do. Oh, well, you didn't do anything? Okay, well, you're out.
Right. Or you did something bad that you don't want to talk about.
Again, if you didn't do anything good, then why are you there?
How many?
And if you can't tell me all the good things you did, then you didn't accomplish anything. And if you didn't accomplish anything, then it's time for somebody else to try. And if we'd all send that message, then they would start doing things for us instead of protecting us against the evil people on the other side.
Sounds like our mission here, Lance. Sounds like what we're trying to convince people that if they would just share the state of us with some more folks.
Well, for the last 8 or 10 years, we've asked people to vote. The last election, people got out and voted. Okay, now we're going to ask you to do a little bit more. You need to vote to get people in there right. That are, we got you voting now. Now we got to get you to vote for people that are going to do things. But yeah, the mission here at True Chat, it's real simple. It's to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And I've been respectful and open and honest with you. I'm telling you, we got to get people in Congress and in the White House and in our state houses who are going to do things for the common man and not tell us that they're going to do things for us, but actually do it. And if you like the show and you talk to your friends and family about it and they go, well, where do you find this thing? What's this thing, a podcast? And how do you get to it? Well, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found. That's the podcast side.
Chew on this item, folks. The book we're reading, a great point's made. Voter turnout's important, but we have to be very careful about how we use it, because the highest voter turnout in history up until that point was right before the secession of the southern states and the beginning of the Civil War. Over 80% turnout of registered voters. So yeah, people showed up and yeah, we took action. Wasn't the right kind of action necessarily. So think about that, because we're getting more people voting, which is good, but we have to not succumb to the idea that there's no way to fix these problems and that it's everybody else's fault. Part of the solution. That's, I think, what we're trying to do here. So you can hear new episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. Eastern time of the podcast. The same thing's available then later on the weekends. Select talk markets around the country. Check out those radio stations, see if they're carrying our program. And if they're not, maybe call them up and say, hey, you should carry this. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.